60 years ago that I first saw Canada's eastern shore from the observation deck of the Empress of Australia. I was 13 years of age, and along with my German-born wife, Frida, we were new immigrants to this land from England. We had been at sea for 10 days because it was November and the crossing had been extremely rough. From the moment we left Liverpool, our ship was battered by gale force winds and gigantic swells that left most passengers confined to their beds, overcome by seasickness. But for me, the trip was one great big adventure. So I was overwhelmed with joy to see land and meet for the first time this beautiful country called Canada, which would become my home for me, my wife, and eventually our 3 sons for many years. That day, I first saw Canada was the first chapter, a clear state of new beginning for both me and Frida. With the frigid Arctic wind biting my face, I felt invigorated and reborn because I had chosen to put down roots in a calling, in a caring and decent country that believed in equality, inclusion, democracy, and merit. But like today, Canada in the 1950s was suspicious of newcomers, who they considered potential threats to security. Since my wife still had family in communist East Germany, our British passports were stamped with a visa allowing us entry behind the Iron Curtain. For those flimsy reasons, our overzealous immigration officer in Montreal impounded our steamship trunks to ensure we were not smuggling Das Kapital into Canada. Today, I'd be outraged, but back then I was young and in strange surroundings, so I politely accepted the suspicion of me with the stiff upper lip of a man who has known that ignorance and government uniforms are generally synonymous. Even though we traveled by train from that day to Toronto with literally the shirts on our backs, I was glad to be rid of my past and thank Canada was willing to give me a chance to build a meaningful life for me and my family. However, by the time we left Toronto's Union Station and took a streetcar along Queen Street, my exultation was turning to anxiety because I didn't know anyone in Canada, and except for $100 in my pocket, we didn't have any financial resources. I started to feel anxious as night wrapped around Toronto, like I had done as a boy when my father was out of work and we didn't know where to turn because there was no social safety network. As our trolley took us to a rooming house in an affordable section of downtown Toronto, I stared out into this sleepy city that was my new home and tried not to think of my past, which had left deep scars into the tissues of my soul. But how could it be otherwise? Because as I write in my book, Harry's Last Stand, a midwife with a penchant for gin delivered me into the arms of my exhausted mother on a cold, blustery day in February 1923, I slept that night in my new crib, a dresser drawer beside her bed, unaware of the troubles that surrounded me, because my dad was a coal miner. We lived rough and ready in the hard-scrabble Yorkshire town of Barnsley. Money and happiness didn't come easily for the likes of us. Considering the hunger, the turmoil, and the squalor in Britain during those early years of the 20th century, it was miraculous that I lived to see my 3rd birthday, that I survived colic, flu, infections, scrapes and bangs without the benefits of modern sanitation, hygiene or healthcare. I must give thanks to my sturdy peasant genes. As a baby, I was ignorant of the great sorrow that enveloped England and Europe like a damp grey fog. The nation was still in mourning for her dead from the world's first Great War. It had ended only 5 short years before my arrival. Nearly 1 million British soldiers had been killed in that conflict. It had begun in farce in 1914 and ended in bloody tragedy in 1918. In 4 years, that war killed more than 37 million men, women and children around the world. Even when the guns were silent across the battlefields, were made dumb by peace, the killing didn't stop. Death refused to take a holiday, and the pestilence stormed across the globe. It was called the Spanish flu. The pandemic lasted until 1921 and erased 100 million people from the ledge books of the living. Like most people in Barnsley, my family occupied a terraced house. They were built back to back and in a row of 10 units. There was little space, privacy or comfort for us or any of the other occupants. It was just a place to rest your head after spending 10 hours hacking coal from the side of a rock face hundreds of feet below the ground. 3 walls out of 4 were connected to another household. The floors were made of hard slate rock and was partially covered with old rags that had been hand-woven into coarse mats. The interior walls were comprised of wet limestone coated in a gruel-thin whitewash that never seemed to look clean. In summer, our home was hot, in autumn damp, and in winter bitterly cold. While spring was as wet as autumn again. The house had no electricity and only, our house had no, we didn't have electricity in those days, gas. The house had no gas, and the only parlour, and only in the parlour and scullery possessed the gaslight fixture. After sunset, it sputtered and hissed a gloomy yellow light that illuminated our poverty. I shared a room with my older sister, Alberta. We slept together on a straw mattress that was the host to many insects and reeked of thyme and other people's piss. Its covering was made from a rough material that was comfortable to me as the occasions when my father tickled my face with his mustache. Depending on the season, I slept in my undershirt and remained fully clothed during the cold months. Alberta and I nestled together and shared our body heat to stave off the chilling frost beating against the window pane. Our parlour had no furniture except a stool and an upright piano that had come as part of my dad's legacy from his father, but it stood mute against the wall because the room was occupied by my infirm and dying eldest sister, Marion. At the age of 4, she had contracted tuberculosis, which was a common disease among our class. Her ailment was caused because my parents were compelled to live in a disease-ridden mining slum at the end of the Great War. Eventually, my parents were able to leave the slum, and by then the damage had already been done to my sister's health. The TB spread into her spine. It left her a paraplegic with a hunchback. For the last 12 months of her life, Marion was totally dependent on my mother to be fed, bathed, and clothed. In those days, there was no national health service. You either had the dosh to pay for your medicine or you did without. Your only hope for some medical care was the council poorhouse that accepted indigent patients. As a young lad, I was encouraged by my parents to spend time with my ailing sister. I think it was because they knew that she was dying and they wanted me to remember her for the rest of my life. I didn't comprehend illness or death because I was only 3 at the time, so I contented myself with playing near her sickbed. On some occasions, I told her nonsense stories, but my sister couldn't respond. Invoked my dead sister's name as a warning that workhouse awaited each of us unless the world and our circumstances changed. In the end, Mother never had to resort to sending my surviving sister and me to the workhouse. But one day, after our financial situation became critical, my mother decided it was time that I earned my crust of bread. So at the age of 7, I began my working career. I was a barrow boy. I hauled beer around in a push cart around our slum. The cart was bigger than me, and at times I felt like a brick pony with a load too heavy to carry. This job was hard and demeaning to me because I had to concentrate so much on helping out my parents, and my schooling suffered. It was also dangerous work, delivering beer in Bradford's less affluent neighbourhoods. I encountered characters that were unsavoury, criminal, and others that was emotionally broken by the Great Depression, that I wouldn't blame them for finding comfort in a bottle of beer. I took employment at 7 and pushed a cart filled with beer, not because I wanted to buy something special for myself. I took that job because it was a matter of life and death for my parents and my other sister, Alberta. So when well-heated corporate leaders and Tory politicians tell the people of the 21st century, Canada, that austerity is necessary, I shake my head and remember with pain how long dead low-taxed business leaders compelled politicians to enact austerity to preserve their bottom line, while millions of children went to bed hungry and cold in hospitable, squalid rooms. But back then, I was a boy and didn't have a voice. I just had to suffer and starve with everyone else. Today, however, I will not be quiet, because the austerity enacted by Harper's government is outrageous, reckless, and cruel. Austerity will spell the end of democracy unless we, the people, take back our right to a dignified life through the pragmatic protection of the social welfare state. Whether it was in the Britain of my youth or today in Canada, when it comes to the shameful treatment of our less fortunate citizens, the establishment has always believed in the saying, out of sight is out of mind. Since the World Bank crashed in 2008, this country has seen a horrific increase in food banks, rampant rent and fuel poverty, and a hollowing out of the middle class or their aspirations for a life that has both comfort and security. Like today, for so many young families, my parents in the 1930s couldn't make the rent, and we did midnight runners. During the Great Depression, the youth of my generation was sacrificed, first through unfettered capitalism, the greed of unregulated industrialists, government incompetence and myopia, and finally press-ganged into the charnel house caused by the Second World War. Today, my grandchildren's generation is also being sacrificed, and it must end. But for this to end, we have to start looking at the true culprits of austerity and death of the social safety networks. It's not the poor, new immigrants, welfare cheats that are robbing the citizens of this country of a decent and fulfilling life. It is the elites and the right-wing politicians that serve their interests. That is why this Harper government presents a great risk to our civilized society. Their message of austerity and restraint to the 99% and untold wealth to the 1% will return Canada to the dog-eat-dog world of my boyhood in the 1930s. The Harper government has robbed the vulnerable of their benefits through massive cutbacks and universal programs. They have hobbled the EI program to the detriment of the hard-worked Canadians who have lost their job through no fault of their own, but because this government values corporate lobbyists over ordinary workers. This government has waged a protected war against trade unionism, which is the bulwark of any functioning democracy. They have silenced government scientists for daring to defy Tories' corporate dogma about environmental change that threatens this planet. This government has shown contempt to our First Nations, which is not only deplorable, it is a catastrophe in the making. This government, despite its John Wayne rhetoric when it comes to its politically motivated war on terror, has shown disdain and contempt for all our veterans. This government has shown that it doesn't respect the ordinary, diverse citizens, but with Bill C-51, this government has shown that it doesn't respect democracy, because this bill will later fetter our individual rights and freedoms within its absolute power to snoop through our lives like a tabloid journalist ferrets through garbage for celebrity gossip. Bill C-51 will do more than ruin lives. It will be as great a threat to democracy as war against Canada from a hostile nation. It is for those reasons that we must start demanding more from our government and ourselves. We have to demand that corporations are taxed fairly, can't hide their wealth offshore like pirates burying their loot in the Caribbean. The minimum wage has to be abolished and a living wage enacted that enables all our citizens to have an adequate standard of living. The voting age must be lowered to 16, and education must become affordable again to our young. As for housing, it's time people stop looking at their homes as nest eggs rather than a nest. So we have to start investing in affordable housing for all our citizens. The citizens of Canada have to remember they are worth more than the profits of hedge fund managers. You are worth more than flat wages, high student debt and few prospects. You are worth more than a cost of living crisis that ensures you will never have a home to call your own. You are worth more than corporations who won't pay a living wage and hide their profits offshore in tax-free havens. You're worth more than a Harper government that rules by politics of fear and intimidation. In October, I won't tell you how to vote, but I will tell you this. If you want a Canada where prosperity is in the reach of every citizen, not just the 1%, you can't vote for a Tory government. If you want a Canada where individual rights are respected and you are paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, you can't vote for the Tories. I do have a question for all of us. I don't know the answer or the solution, but I must ask it anyway. Do we want to see a return to those black days of 1930? Have we as a society and as individuals forgotten that we must always be vigilant against those who believe that only rich, only the privileged and only the well-connected deserve proper health care, job protection and higher education? Doesn't every citizen in this country, regardless of their background, their position in society, have the fundamental right to an education, decent housing, fair working conditions, and a decent pension. I must ask this one final question. Doesn't every one of us in this country have the obligation to assist and defend those who are less fortunate than us, to ensure that they are not left behind, that they are not cheated out of their rights to a decent standard of living? So as I leave you tonight, I want to let you know that I am very old, but I don't despair, because over my life I have seen much. I have seen much hard, but I have also experienced much joy and happiness. I know it's within us to build a better country, but to do it, you must go out and fight for economic and social justice all across Canada. I know we can win this fight because we did it before, and all it takes is perseverance. Thank you.
Canadians actually cast a vote, and these trends are particularly pronounced for young people like myself. Many polls show, for instance, that millennials or Generation Y or boomerangs or whatever you want to call us, we're more likely to support strong climate action and other elements of a progressive political agenda than people of older generations, and yet in the 2011 election, fewer than 40% of people below the age of 30 actually showed up to vote. And so Elections Canada commissioned a study to figure out why this might be the case, and it concluded that, while some people might find it difficult to vote and may find it confusing, the real reason why there's such low turnout among people my age is that people like myself, well, not myself particularly, but in this age group, feel like politics, does not speak to them, is not relevant to their lives, and they feel disillusioned with the entire system for some of the reasons Harry described about the Harper government's current approach. And this disengagement and disillusionment has consequences for all of us, because in the 2011 election, if 20% more young people had voted, a pollster named Nick Nanos calculated, then it's likely that Harper wouldn't have won his majority. And so these are some of the things that I was considering as I was trying to figure out what to ask Harry after his speech. And like Michelle also said, we reached out to Tyee readers before the event and got you to submit questions. And so when I went through all of those questions, there were certain themes that kept repeating over and over, and so I've incorporated that into my own questioning. And I think the most important thing that came through is that myself and the Tyee readers, we all know that Stephen Harper is trying to take this country backward and trying to make it more unequal. But the real question is, and I think what Harry is in a really good position to speak to is, how do we get the citizens of Canada up off their asses, in your words, and out to the ballot box, and particularly members of a younger generation? And so I think to begin answering that question, we have to go back in time about 80 or 90 years. And Harry, you said in the past that In the 20s and 30s, your generation also felt very jaded and cynical towards politics, and can you explain why that was the case?
It was because we were actually the lost generation of the 20th century, and I can see the youth today in Canada being the lost generation of the 21st century, because they're going to be probably as old as I was before they were able to get a decent job and a decent place to live. I was 30 years old when I came to Canada, and I was 40 years old before I got a house, so I think they may be in about the same boat, you know.
But you felt at the time that, you know, politicians weren't really representing your interests or helping you out?
The politicians in England, no. There was just no work. You couldn't find a job, and of course, England was always very conscious of your accent, you know? I mean, and coming from Yorkshire, I didn't talk like that. I talked pretty broad, you know. So I figured when I was 14 and had to go to work and got a job, that with my first paycheck, I would take language lessons to make me talk a little more like the Toffs. It cost me a shilling every Saturday, but boy, was it ever worth it.
And when you were trying to support your family and care for your sister who had tuberculosis, did you feel like you had any political power at all, or were you even thinking about that? Or were you just thinking about trying to survive day to day?
It was just a matter of trying to survive from day to day. For one thing, I mean, we just never had enough food. We were starving most of the time. I used to take my sister behind restaurants and go through their garbage cans to find bits of scraps of food left in there to push us along. It was so bad that children started fainting in schools, and the government magnanimously then decided that they would give us a small bottle of milk for the indigenous people, you know. So I remember so many days tramping to school with an empty belly and just visualizing that little glass of milk and breathing it in my belly.
And then, of course, you know, World War II came along, and you went out to Europe and fought. And I'm wondering if you could tell the room what that experience was like.
It was very interesting, and I must admit I never really faced any big danger. I was a wireless operator, which meant they had to teach me the Morse code, and I had to learn about transmitters and receivers and all that sort of thing. But I did hear some very interesting conversations about West Plains and that sort of thing. It was a good life. I wound up in Belgium and Holland, and then on into Germany, Hamburg, Germany, which was just devastated. There wasn't a building standing in the town centre. In fact, it looked like Pompeii after the you know what it's like.
Oh, the eruption?
Yes. I met my wife there. I was one of the the big bonuses of the war for me, she actually she made me a human being again. Because I hated everything by that time. I'd seen so much poverty and hunger in England, and then in Germany it was the same there for the civilian population. They were starving too. And after I met my wife, Frida, I was constantly, don't tell anyone, stealing food from the Air Force to feed her and her family, you know. But I didn't feel I was doing anything wrong. And she appreciated it because she stayed with me for 52 years.
Well, I'll keep your secret. I'm sure the room will as well. Don't tweet about it.
Oh, but I'll tell you one thing, you know, we talk about mixed marriages and that sort of thing. When I asked my commanding officer if I could get married to a German girl, he said, certainly not. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to marry a foreign national. And so it was, just had to hop over the fence from time to time. And it took a year before the House of Lords decided that it was okay for English people to marry German girls, you know. Isn't that ridiculous? But at least we did succeed in that aspect of it. But they made us suffer. I mean, my wife had to go through all sorts of medical exams and indignities, and I was being pushed right and left to forget the whole business, you know. And then they would say, well, don't cock this up, you know.
And so amidst all this poverty and destruction and carnage, you not only met your wife, but did you also begin to feel like members of your generation had gone through this big struggle together and you know, fought for freedom and democracy? Did you feel more of a shared identity than before the war?
In a sense, yes. Although I don't know, I felt somehow the wars are so criminal, you know, so many people die. It's if I had my way, I'd abolish all wars, you know. But unfortunately, and it happens all the time, it's happening today too, the manufacturers of arms and weapons and articles of war are making literally billions of dollars today, and they're sending them to all these countries who, like ISIS and all this, and Iraq, to fight off those who it really is appalling that we supply weapons to kill people.
I guess what I meant is that by the time the war was done, did you feel like members of your generation, you know, had the power to change things back at home and to make life better for ordinary people? Because you talk a lot in your writing about the 1945 election, yes, and how important that was.
It was. I was surprised because I met thousands of airmen who in my career, and they were all brought up in similar situations, you know. They would come from Wales or Scotland or Ireland, but they were all treated brutally, and they were all of one mind that we had to have a government that was for the people and by the people and would behave as the people told them to behave, you know. And we decided very early on that we would not accept a government in power anymore who didn't promise to give us, at least to begin with, the National Health Service and also new homes as quickly as possible. We understood, of course, that so many houses had been bombed out that they would have the first choice of new buildings. But after that, we implored them that they then turn around and make it possible for ordinary people to have a livable place to live.
And you've described your vote in the first major election after the war as the most important vote of your life. And I'm wondering if you can explain why you felt that was so important.
It was because it was the first election that I'd ever voted in. I don't ever remember being asked to vote in an election. I don't think they give a damn whether I voted or I didn't, you know. But when Clement Attlee, the Labour Minister, promised that the first step would be the National Health Service, we figured that would be a hell of a good start to get things rolling in the right direction. That was in 45. Attlee was, he won the election with a resounding vote. And he went to work so quickly that from 45, by 48, the National Health Service was in force, and people had this free service for illness or whatever ailed them, you know. It was just a miracle. And sometimes I wonder, what's going on today? It seems to take forever to build something. And he builds a National Health Service in a matter of just over 3.5 years. It's uncanny to me.
So after all that you had been through as a child and seen this society where only the wealthy could afford health care, and then all of a sudden within a matter of years there's this service that's available to everyone, what were you feeling about that at the time?
The thing that struck me was in 1948, my time was up with the Air Force, and I went back to Halifax in Yorkshire, and I contracted bronchitis, and I didn't have any money. They don't pay you very much to join the Air Force and get yourself killed, you know. It's, I went to the hospital, and I was so surprised when I saw a doctor in no time at all, and he gave me antibiotics and told me to see him again in a week. And I walked out of there like a rich man. I felt like a somebody, you know. But no, it's necessary. There are certain areas in in a person's life where everyone, regardless of their wealth or standing in society, deserve at least to be treated as we expect to be treated ourselves. There should be no difference between the needs of human beings as far as healthcare is concerned.
And so there's a pretty big divide between what you're describing and what you were talking about in terms of where our society is at now, especially under politicians like Stephen Harper. And so in your mind, when did things start becoming more unequal again? When did history start almost repeating itself?
You know, I think they called us the greatest generation because we seem to achieve so much. And I'd like to think that the youth of Canada and the West can stand up and fight for their rights. And I would say they have the opportunity to be the greatest generation of this century. I think there is a great need for the young people to be given hope. They've lost hope. That isn't the trouble. And they just figure that there's nothing I can do about it. I've tried it and nothing changes, so what the hell? I just float along in this miserable existence, you know. Now, this is going to be one of my main features in my tour through Britain. I want to hit as many young people, universities or schools, high schools, to get them to listen to me and maybe energize them to realize that if they all get up en masse and go out there, register to vote, and on voting day, go out there and swamp the ballot boxes with their votes, they will change this society to what they would like rather than the status quo. Nothing is cheap, nothing is easy. We have to work for everything we do. I'm sure everyone in this room knows we don't get anything for no effort. I didn't get to 92 with no effort either. You know? I'm sure as I worked my ass off. But no, I really am concerned about the young people because I would hate to think that they would have to face the type of life that I faced and my generation faced. And we couldn't do anything about it because we really didn't have any voice until the 1945 election. And then it's strange because Churchill was a great leader for the war. He pulled us through because of his bulldog attitude. But after the war, we all said, conservative? Ooh, no, thank you. And that's what I hope to have the young people here say. No more Tories for me.
So I know you've had a bit of contact with the comedian Russell Brand, and he's been telling young people to throw their voice away, to not vote. And I'm wondering what you think of his opinion on that.
Well, I can't say that I dislike Russell Brand. He is a humorist, and the young people like him, his type of jokes. I guess it makes them laugh, and laughter is something that we lack in the world, you know. So let him stay with that. But he's a millionaire already. And why would he want to get into the political arena? I sure as hell wouldn't. If I had $1 million, that is. But no, but he's a good speaker, and he knows what he's talking about. But to tell people not to vote, I think that's the height of
I do think, though, that Brand is tapping into a sense that a lot of people my own age have, which is that there's no kind of story or struggle that unifies us, and so in the absence of that struggle, you know, why bother? Why will my own part make a difference? And in your experience, you know, you met all these people through the war and afterwards. You've been through, you know, such awful experiences that you demanded better. And I'm wondering if you think there's anything comparable in this age, and any big idea or struggle that, you know, might get young people more interested in politics.
Other than my presence of my spoken words and my insistence as much as I can in trying to induce them to realize that they can change things. They've just lost hope. Maybe they voted 2 or 3 times, and slowly in those 2 or 3 elections, their living standards have gone down rather than up. So they said, to hell with it, you know. But I don't think that the young people, I feel, will turn in the direction of any person or group who is going to lighten their life with conversation or beer. I mean, it gives them an outlet. They can express among themselves what they think, but they don't express it openly to the world at large, you know. So you have to mingle with them, and I'm limited capacity for beer. So I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to go in there and just sit with a shandy for an hour and a half, you know. But if I have to do it, I will.
You said in your speech that austerity and inequality and perverted ideology helped cause things like World War II and the Cold War that had, you know, huge global consequences. And in a sense, those same things, or you could just refer to it as unrestrained capitalism, is causing the climate to warm, and the effects of that, you know, could be just as significant as a world war, or more significant because it could be the end of our civilization. Do you see any parallels there, or do you think that's something that's, you know, for people my age, that's really worth fighting for?
I think I don't have any deep, gloomy thoughts that the end of the world is nigh. I think it's incredible what human beings can achieve when they put their minds to it, and quite often it has to come right to a crisis, and then they will grab it by the neck and shake it until it's gone, you know. But they need to, something has to happen to make them do something that's purposeful. They're not going to go along with some politician who says, I mean, climate change is definitely here. We all know that. But there are so many other things in the countries that need to be fixed. Once we fix the austerity and people's livelihoods, then we can turn our direction to other more serious problems in the world, like climate change. And but we have to find a starting point and work from there. But the starting point, first of all, has to be human beings and getting them on the right footing to feel part of Canada or part of England, rather than just they feel like no one cares about them. They're there, but if they fall down in the street, you'd step over them, you know. So no, it's not an easy task. It's not easy to solve, but the solving can be done, and I am determined this time that you see, for one thing that galls me are these lobbyists, these leeches that lurk around the government buildings, whispering in the ears of politicians, you know, that if you get the government to buy a little section of that NHS system, we'll reward you fully, you know. But, and this is happening, believe it or not. In England, the National Health Service there is being bought out bit by bit by privatization. Privatization is the big thing today, you know. In Britain, believe it or not, you have to pay. Water's been privatized in Britain. If you want a glass of water, you have to have paid your bill or you don't get any. We don't realize how much of our country has been sold off, you know, until we come face to face with it.
So I just have one final question for you, and I'm not sure how closely you were following what happened in Alberta this spring, but you had a government that had been around for over 4 decades, and it was in a crisis of plummeting oil prices. It was telling regular people to tighten their belts while basically giving free rein to corporations. And the people of Alberta completely rejected that idea and destroyed this political dynasty. Do you think there's a chance that, you know, Canadians could achieve the same thing in October? defeating Harper? I mean, is there anger and a will to change in your opinion?
I think there is. And it's something that we all have to do our part, actually, and make sure in our conversations with people that if you stick with Harper, you will go nowhere, because Harper seems to be more concerned with the possibility that we may be invaded by some rebellious native outfit, because they want to move in here. Maybe we should send Harper over to ISIS. Let's see how he feels about that.
All right, well, that unless you want to add anything, but that's also a nice way to leave on that.
Thank you so much. I hope that all of you will join us at the reception afterwards. We'll see how long Harry can last with a beer. They may even have the makings for a shandy. I don't know. We'll see. Jeff is going to be starting to write his book when he's back from a well-deserved holiday in the summer. And he will be doing some writing for the Taillis from Paris, the climate talk. So really looking forward to that. Just want to thank Harry again and Jeff for this wonderful evening, and I hope that we'll continue the conversation in the reception, and also some of the questions that might not have made it into this dialogue will make it into a future interview with Harry too. So if you submitted a question and it didn't get into tonight, it may get into a future piece with Harry then. So thank you very much. And